Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Stylus Author Webinar on a teaching approach to empowering students learning and developing their process skills and introduction to POGIL. I want to make sure that you can see me and hear me, and if you can, please go ahead and let me know in the chat box. This should be on the side of your screen. If we are broadcasting okay and you can hear everything, let me know. Yes, Courtney, excellent. Shannon, thank you. Okay, great. Looks like we're coming across just fine. Excellent. So welcome, everyone. I'm so excited for you to be here for this webinar. I'm also really excited to have Shawn Simonson joining me to be talking about this edited collection on POGIL, which is so fascinating. I'm going to go ahead and orient you to the space really quickly and then give Shawn a chance to introduce himself before we dive in. If you have been here before for one of our series, you know that there is an Ask a Question button that you can ask a question of us. And I would recommend that you do that if you do have a question. It allows us to timestamp Shawn's answers so that for people watching later, they can go directly to those Q&A responses. You can also type a question into chat if you would like, but it's going to make it a little more convenient if you ask a question using that Ask a Question button. You'll also see a button at the bottom of the screen where you can learn more about Shawn's book. This is going to take you to the Stylus page if you want to take a look at the edited collection. It would make an excellent reading group possibility for those of you who are here as faculty developers, so you can always go there to learn a little bit more. And we do recommend absolutely back channeling in the chat. So feel free to talk to each other, offer resources, offer links as you're going throughout the webinar. I'm going to hand it over to Shawn. Shawn, you want to give a quick introduction of yourself?
Sure. Thank you. I'm Shawn Simonson. I'm a professor at Boise State University. I've been at Boise for almost 13 years. I am an exercise physiologist and environmental physiologist in the Department of Kinesiology. And I also have a 25% appointment in the Center for Teaching and Learning as a faculty associate. And I got to that faculty development because of POGIL. When I started with the POGIL project in 2008, it got me into student-centered learning, thinking about what students do in the classroom and what they can remember and retain. And I started using POGIL in my classroom in 2008, and in 2011 I attended the first facilitator training for the POGIL project and became a facilitator. Started facilitating workshops at Boise State and around the country and internationally for POGIL. And that led me to changes in my career to where now I focus on teaching and learning more than I do exercise physiology.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Shawn.
Yep.
For folks who are new here, you might also not know who I am. So I am Katie Linder, and I'm also a Stylus author, and I facilitate this series so that we can dig in and learn a little bit more about some of these books and the authors who are writing them or editing them. And I want to know where everybody's coming from too. So go ahead and let us know in the chat box. Where are you broadcasting from today that you're listening to today's webinar? We would love to know what institutions are here, what cities you're from, and feel free to tell us about your weather. Of course, here in Oregon, it's nice and rainy. So let us know in the chat where everybody is coming from. Okay, we have Christy from the University of Alabama. Texas hot, I imagine that it is, yes. Sunny today in University of, assuming that's Wisconsin, yes. Orange County, California, Boston, Florida University, Michigan State. We have a friend from Canada, welcome. All over the place, okay. This is really fun to see. All right, well, welcome everyone. Now, again, if you've been here before, you know that I usually start with some questions for our guest, and then I welcome you to ask questions whenever you want using that Ask a Questions button. So I thought I would start out today by just asking Shawn if he could describe a little bit what POGIL is, especially for people here who might not really know what this concept means. So let's start there. Shawn, can you tell us a little bit about what POGIL is?
Sure. POGIL is an acronym that stands for Process-Oriented Guided Inquiry Learning. It's a cooperative learning strategy in which students work obviously in teams, because that's what cooperative learning is. They work in teams to complete guided inquiry activities that are specifically designed to not only help students learn the content, but to help them develop critical process skills, or what others might call life skills or soft skills. So what's critical about POGIL is, yes, we have the guided inquiry component, we have the cooperative learning, but the focus on the process skills is what makes POGIL unique compared to other cooperative learning strategies.
Okay, so let's dive in even more to this. I'm curious, when you think about POGIL, why is this such a key skill for our students to learn right now? What is it about, the jobs that they're being prepared for? This is something that can obviously be used across disciplines. Why is this such an effective thing for our students to know?
Well, we actually just did a presentation for our freshman seminar about why it's important to develop process skills and not just focus on the content of the course. 67% of students who graduate with a bachelor's degree end up not working in the area that they got their bachelor's degree in. They go into a different area. In addition, if you ask employers what are the top 10 things that they want employees to be able to do, only one of those is related to content. So it's these process skills or soft skills, people skills that are critical, that we really should be helping students learn. And in the POGIL project, we focus on assessment, and that's self-assessment, that's metacognition, and that's one process skill that we really pay attention to. We also do critical thinking, information processing, management, oral and written communication, problem solving, and teamwork. So those are the 7 that POGIL really focuses on, but others are developed as well. Beyond the process skills, what really drew me to POGIL was I can see the students learning. They're working in class, they're cooperating, they're talking about the content, they're observing models that are similar to what the people who discovered the concepts used to make those discoveries. And so they're looking through those models, they're asking questions like the experts did, and they develop the concepts themselves. And they are much more engaged, they're excited about it, and they remember it. There's a lot of data out there that shows that POGIL works. Students remember things much long term. It's much better than other passive learning strategies.
Okay, so that stat that you said, Shawn, it was 67% of students are taking jobs that are not in their original discipline of study?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm really curious for the people who are here in our audience. Give us a yes or no about whether your current job is tied to your original discipline of study. I know that mine is not. I can tell you that. I'm part of that 67%. Okay. I'm seeing a lot of no's, some yeses.
Yeah, there's some yeses, but there's a lot of no's in there too.
Some are not even close from Bridget. Okay. Yeah. Oh, so there's a nice mix in there. I mean, this is something that I think, many of us can relate to, that we start in one pathway and then maybe we branch off into something entirely different. We may be using skills from that original discipline, but not necessarily the content, exactly like you were saying, Shawn. So This seems to be one benefit of POGIL, of helping students to develop job readiness, that they can kind of translate some of these skills into their jobs. Are there other benefits of helping students practice this specifically in the classroom and really tying it in with some of the things they might be learning within their own disciplines?
Yeah, the students really do learn the content much better. We have several studies that show they do better on this final assessment in the class. You give them a pre-test at for the subsequent class the next semester, and the students who did that POGIL remember the content better than students who had a lecture course. And so they're remembering the content better. They do better on the ACS exam, for example, the American Chemical Society exam. Students who do POGIL end up doing better on national exams. So it's really, the content is learned much better. And I've had students come to me 2 or 3 years later when they went to PT school or medical school, and they say, I was so much better prepared than my colleagues because I knew how to think. I knew how to analyze data. I knew how to use this material in ways that my colleagues didn't. So they're not only are they learning the content, but they're remembering it and they're able to use it later on.
Okay, so David is asking a really good question here. He says, can you really sell students on process skills, or do you just sneak it in as you get them involved in learning? It's like, can you put in like the zucchini into the brownies? You know, can you hide
Yep.
can you hide some of this stuff in ways that they're not going to see it? Do you think this is something that is better when it's overt, when you tell students what this is, when you are kind of trying to sell them on it, as David is saying, or is this something that you're really just trying to embed like you would any other kind of pedagogical practice and not necessarily being overt about it?
Right. I think there's really two approaches. And I think embedding them in the activities, that's one thing about POGIL activities, is they have to be carefully designed and crafted to elicit those process skills. I'm actually going through a series of activities that I wrote right now, verifying that I'm actually making students do the things that I think that they're doing. Are they really interpreting graphs? Are they following flowcharts and being able to create data? And so, yes, that's embedding them in the activities is critical. But I've also found with POGIL, because it's a novel experience for most students when they first get it. And most people, let's be honest, most of us have experienced group work that is highly ineffective. And a lot of students come to classes and they know that you're going to use group work and they start to shut down right away. Say, oh, this is terrible. I hate group work. And I must be honest, I had that approach originally myself. But what the thing is that I found with POGIL and using any unusual pedagogy is you have to communicate with the students. And so from the very first day, I do introductory activities that help them understand that they're going to learn these process skills and what the values of those skills are. So I'm very upfront. The first day I have them in teams. I have them exploring why teams are effective. I have them learn about using roles so that the teams are more effective. So yeah, I communicate with them right up front, but I also embed it in the activities. The other thing is, if you're going to spend time with the students talking about process skills, having them learn process skills, you have to also assess process skills. You can't just, it's like any other part of the content. You can't just teach it and expect the students to get it. You have to assess, did they learn that skill? Are they able to use those things? Can they work with a team? Can they self-assess? Can they solve problems? So that has to be built into your assessments as well as your content.
Okay, so we have more questions coming in. You guys are doing an awesome job in the audience. You know exactly how this works. So keep the questions coming. Feel free to post them in the chat, or you can post them in the Ask a Questions area. So Sarah says, how do we connect the process of learning to the sequence of teaching strategies to make sure that there's alignment there? I'm assuming kind of that alignment piece is always what I'm thinking about. Can you share some ideas for that, Shawn?
Yeah, so the POGIL uses the original three-part learning cycle of explore, concept invention, and application. So the first thing we do, and Sarah, let me know if I'm not answering your question the way that you're asking it. But the first thing we do is we have students explore the model that we present to them. And a model is often something, like I said earlier, that the original developers of concepts used to develop the concepts. For example, in my field, we might look at a chart or data of heart rate versus exercise intensity, blood pressure over time, that type of thing. But it could be passage from literature. It could be figures, any kind of model that displays the concepts that you want the students to learn. And so what you're doing here is you're asking questions to get them to explore the model, find key features, notice trends. Once you get them noticing trends, then you get to do the information processing and the critical thinking. What's the concept that you're developing? And so now they're actually solving a problem, they're developing the concept. So you're connecting the process to the content. Once they've developed that concept, which is the second part of the learning cycle, then we have them apply it through open-ended questions, divergent questions where there's multiple correct answers. We have them apply it So now we're really getting to that problem-solving ability and embedding the skills in the activity. And if you haven't seen a well-written POGIL activity, in the back of the POGIL book, there's a code that you can scan, and it'll take you to the web page at the Stylus web page that'll show you some examples of the activities, and there are some that are annotated that indicate the process skills and how they're embedded in the activity. So it really shows you the sequence of learning the content, but also developing the process skills. It's all mapped out in some of those examples.
So I would imagine, Shawn, some people might be curious about how do you get started with designing an activity? Because it sounds very intentional and you're really trying to build in a lot of things and make sure that you're assessing them and all of that. When you think about designing a new POGIL activity for a classroom, what would be kind of the first stages of that? How would you get started?
Go to a POGIL workshop. So I would not encourage anybody to try and write an activity unless they have a really good understanding of what POGIL is and how to actually use it. So the POGIL project does workshops that are anywhere from 90 minutes to 3 days. They do 4 3-day workshops in the summers, but can also do workshops at your institution by request. And you just go to pogil.org and they'll be happy to set that up. So there's an introductory workshop that can be 90 minutes to 3 hours, depending upon what kind of time frame you have. And then we also have follow-up workshops that explain facilitation, how to develop process skills, and how to write an activity. And we explore the activity structure. What is a robust model? But of course, we start with learning outcomes first. Then what is a robust model and how to write the questions and map those questions. Once someone has done that initial work, we also have a writer's retreat every summer where we bring people from all over the country, actually from all over the world, to a location where we spend a week helping you learn how to write activities, giving you feedback from your peers, from author coaches, really helping you develop as an activity writer. If you can't do that, POGIL does have a review process so that you can write an activity, send it into the project. We'll find somebody in your content area to review the activity, give you some feedback about how well does it meet the POGIL criteria. If it's great, we can actually endorse it and say, yes, this is a POGIL activity, not just a guided inquiry activity. And we're also developing a clearinghouse for authors at various stages of writing activity, from I just have this great idea to I need somebody to test my activity, that we hope to have up to speed within the next year, where people can submit any part of an activity and have others help them refine it and work on it. But so long way around is come to a workshop, learn about POGIL, learn what an activity looks like, and then start trying it. And there is actually a chapter in the book about how to write an activity that was written by 2 of our really great author coaches, Mary Sullivan and Cliff Kusmal.
Okay, so Shawn, one of the things I really appreciated about this edited collection, I'm looking at it now, right here, is that in the very beginning, it breaks down POGIL by looking at kind of the process itself, and then the guided inquiry piece, and then the learning piece, and kind of the evidence. I'm wondering if there are other kind of key elements of POGIL, or if you want to walk through each of those things as kind of separate pieces of this process. Like you mentioned, there's this 3-part component that we're kind of breaking down. But when you think about kind of the process as it relates to the guided inquiry, as it relates to the learning, how can you kind of break apart those pieces as key elements of how we understand POGIL and how it works?
Great question. So when we introduce people to POGIL, we break down the acronym. And that's what I did in the first organization of the initial part of the book. So process oriented is the process skills, because that is unique to POGIL. Developing those 7 target skills is critical to an actual POGIL activity, as opposed to just group work or a guided inquiry activity. So we have those 7 that I mentioned earlier, and they're all over the POGIL book. They're all over the POGIL website, so that you can see them. We have those 7. And what we've done is, as we said earlier, we try to embed those in the activities, and that's mapped out as part of that chapter on the process. We try to embed them in the activity, but again, it's all about assessing those skills, really using the skills. And one of the things that I'd say probably 3 years ago, Mary Sullivan and I did a little activity at the POGIL National Meeting, asking POGIL practitioners what some of the critical things they thought were useful to being successful in POGIL. And one was related to process skills, and that was the use of roles. So one of the things that is strongly encouraged in POGIL is using roles in the teams. Common roles are a manager, a person who kind of makes sure the team's on track, keeps time, makes sure everybody's contributing. You have a manager, you have a spokesperson or a presenter who speaks for the team. And this is really helpful for students who don't like to speak in class, because they know that once every 4 days, they're going to have that role. They don't have to worry about it 3 other days. But when they do have to speak, they're presenting the team's ideas and not theirs. And so that's a little safer for students to become comfortable being vocal in class. So we have the manager, we have the spokesperson or the presenter, we have a recorder, person who writes down what the team's doing, key things that they learned. In my class, the recorder also turns in a minute paper at the end of the day about money points and most important thing they learned. So the recorder is a person who writes down anything that is important that the team does. And the fourth thing varies depending upon the implementation. Some people do a strategy analyst or a process reflector. It's that person's job to tell the team how they're doing as a team. Are they working together? Is everybody contributing? And what those POGIL practitioners told Mary and I was using the roles is important for making POGIL successful and developing process skills. Because it's really easy to say, I'm not going to worry about roles, because it does take a little more work to use them. And you have to teach the students how to do them, which the POGIL project has good resources for. But it's much more effective when students have those roles. They work better, they know what there is expected of them, and they fulfill that role. So that's one of the critical things in the process part. In the guided inquiry part, it's really following the learning cycle and really being intentional about what are my learning outcomes? Are they specific? Are they student-centered? Are they active? I mean, are the students actually going to do something? Can they demonstrate that they completed them? Are they achievable? I mean, can the students actually do them? Or are we too pie in the sky for the students? So writing those learning outcomes, developing a clear model that only tells them what they need to know and doesn't have a lot of confusing extraneous evidence is useful. And then writing those guided inquiry questions, good exploration questions that really help them explore the model and get them from where they start to where you want them to be. And that process is actually a little bit trickier than what it seems initially. So that really, I don't know if that answers your question, but those are some critical things about the POGIL part. The learning part, Stanley Lowe did a fantastic job summarizing the research out there, providing evidence that POGIL actually does work. He also did a very good job of highlighting areas that we don't know enough about what POGIL does. Mm-hmm. And he's suggested some future areas for additional work. So if you're a person who's in the scholarship of teaching and learning, Stanley's chapter's got lots of ideas about studies that you can perform if you want to study POGIL.
Very cool. Okay. So we have another question from David, and he says, very theoretical question here, but I just had this thought. Could pointing out process thwart deep thinking? Like when a musician or painter does something really creative and you analyze how they got there instead of just letting the art happen. In other words, do you have to know process, or can you just know your discipline? In parentheses, does an artist have to know process, or could they just create? What do you think?
I think I haven't really thought about this question before from that perspective, to be honest with you. So off the top of my head, I think it's, we're going to stick with the art okay, tongue-tied there. The art, anyway, we're going to stick with art or creativity. I think that what you're talking about is, yes, there are some people who are very talented who can be very successful without training. But if we give them training or more guidance, how much better can they be? If they learn the techniques, can that push them to a next level? So yeah, I think we can sneak up on them or just let it happen organically. But like many things, it helps if we reflect on it after we've done it perhaps and process what we did and think about, hey, did we actually get this? What did we just do? And that's part of metacognition that we're trying to help the students develop.
This also reminds me of working with faculty in course design. They're often instinctually doing things that are research-based, but then when they find out, oh, this is actually a thing, I didn't know it was a thing, it's very affirming to their process, and they can build on it and actually do more sophisticated things than they might have done just instinctually.
Exactly. I've experienced that same example, so yeah.
Okay, excellent. Just a reminder to everyone, keep your questions coming. You are welcome to ask a question in the Ask a Questions feature, or you can put it in the chat and we will go ahead and answer it. Okay, so I'm curious, Shawn, I'm always interested in origin stories. If there are specific things that led you into writing this book, editing this book, bringing people together around this issue, what was it that kind of sparked this for you to know that this was something you wanted to put out into the world?
I didn't want to put this out into the world. I never really thought about it. I was at the POD, our Professional Organizational Development Network meeting in 2014. And POD is really the faculty developers professional organization. And this was my first meeting. And I can't even remember the session that I was at or the activity that we were specifically doing, but we were in teams and we were doing a carousel activity, going around a room and responding to problems that the facilitators gave us. And I was in this team with 3 or 4 other people, and we came to this problem, and I looked at the problem, and it was about students learning content and applying the information. And I looked at my team and I said, well, the answer is obvious, it's POGIL. And they said, what's POGIL? So I told them and I described the process, and we had a little conversation about it. Well, after that session was over, one of my teammates came up to me and said, hi, I'm John Von Noring. I'm the publisher for Stylus. I would like to know more about POGIL. So we talked about POGIL a little bit. He says, is there a POGIL book? And I said, not that I'm aware of. And it turns out there was one that the ACS put out many years ago, but there really wasn't an accessible POGIL book. And I said, no, not that I'm aware of. And John said, do you want to write it? And I said, well, I would be interested, but I can't answer that because I was just a POGIL practitioner and facilitator. I felt like I couldn't speak for the POGIL project. So I went back to the POGIL project to Rick Moog, who is the executive director, and Marcy Dubroff, who's the associate. And I talked to those two about, is this something that makes sense? And Rick said, yeah, I've actually been thinking about it. We should have a book that describes POGIL that makes it accessible to people. He said, but he wasn't going to do it. And I said, well, all right, I will get it started if you folks will help me do it. And so we came up with an author list and a plan of attack. And so the POGIL project and Rick Moog and Marcy Dubroff really helped me put the whole idea together and put the book together.
That's awesome. I love those origin stories. Okay, so we have another really great question here coming in. How does POGIL, problem-based learning, and case study learning intersect?
Okay, so problem-based learning and case study learning can be similar, but they tend to be less guided than POGIL. So in POGIL, you give the students a model and then guide them through that model and help them learn the concept. Whereas problem-based learning, case study learning, especially with PBL, you really give them a problem and the students have to kind of figure out what knowledge do they need to solve that problem. What content do they have to have? So with POGIL, we're being a little more explicit or a little more directed in helping them develop that content. I actually use case studies a lot as the application exercises at the end of my POGIL activity. So once students have developed the concepts, have a good understanding, now I want them to apply it, and that's where I use case studies. And I kind of blend problem-based learning and case studies together as I'm doing that at the end. So to answer your question, I have them intersect at the end of the guided inquiry activity. But I think if you're truly doing PBL, we're a little more prescriptive about what we want students to know than if we're than what you do normally in PBL or case studies.
Okay, so we have a similar question from Bridget. She says, similar question about cooperative learning. Do you consider POGIL to be a form of cooperative learning?
Oh, definitely. I think it's the penultimate or the ultimate form of cooperative learning. I think it's students really are working together, developing concepts, relying on each other, collaborating to develop concepts and learn. So yeah, I think it is the best example of it that I have found for getting students to work together and cooperate and collaborate in the classroom. And that's one of the key things there that I should point out is that all of the teamwork in a POGIL classroom happens in the classroom. It doesn't happen outside of class. Students don't have to figure out when to get together. It's all happening in the classroom when they can actually help each other and learn together, as opposed to go off and do parts and bring it all to Frankenstein a project together.
Okay, our audience has warmed up, Shawn, so we're getting questions fast and furious here. So the next one is, do you see POGIL as something to be done every day or to be combined with other teaching strategies? How does that function?
Yes. So when you're using POGIL, you have to do it enough that the students get used to it and become comfortable working in teams and develop the skills. So it can be, we often recommend to folks that they start with 2 or 3 times a semester at least, that is a minimum. I have a colleague that when he started, he did POGIL once a week just to get his feet wet and get comfortable with it and get the students comfortable with it. And that seemed to really work well for him. However, there are people, and I have classes where I use POGIL 100% of the time as my primary strategy. I have another class that I teach where when I want students to learn new content, I use POGIL. When I am reviewing, it's a senior level course that kind of ties all the things together. So when I want them to learn new content, I use POGIL. But when I'm trying to tie things together from courses that they've had previously, I use team-based learning. So I blend those pedagogies together. So I think POGIL definitely is very strong and works well by itself, but I think it's also flexible enough that you can blend in other strategies, other teaching pedagogies, things that work for the individual.
Okay, so we have kind of a connected question to that. How does the POGIL teaching pedagogy work with other approaches like the decoding the disciplines approach? Does teaching with POGIL have to be team-based?
So if you're going to do POGIL, I would say yes, it has to be team-based, because that's part of the critical part of POGIL, is it is a cooperative learning strategy. The students do work together, and a well-designed activity should be challenging enough that it's the rare individual student who could do it by themselves. You really want the students to have to work together to develop that, because learning really is a social process. We learn better if we're doing it in a group, interacting with other people. So yes, it has to be POGIL, it has to be team-based. Now, as far as decoding the disciplines, really, I think it fits very well, because my goal as an instructor or facilitator when I'm using POGIL is to get the students from thinking like a novice to thinking like an expert, or to get them to move along that continuum. So I really focus on threshold concepts. I focus on common misconceptions. I focus on how does an expert think about the content versus how does a novice, and really try to help them move along that continuum. Obviously, they're not going to get there in one class, but hopefully across a curriculum, across their academic careers, we can move them much closer to that. So I think it aligns very well with decoding the disciplines.
Okay. Next, we have a question from Sarah. She asks, how has POGIL been successful in different areas of study? Can you give us a couple examples across different disciplines?
Sure. And I will tell you that there are 3 chapters in the POGIL book that talk about this. There's chapter 5, the learning, where Stanley Lowe presents a good summary of what we know, the actual evidence across different disciplines. And then there's a chapter on how POGIL fits very well into STEM, and then a chapter on how it fits into non-STEM courses. Because a lot of people think we think differently in those areas, and so we wanted to address that. So POGIL came out of chemistry. So there's a lot of evidence that it works very well in chemistry, then moved into biology and other STEM areas. We've got a team of authors working in mathematics now, physical science. So it's pretty clear that STEM works really well, because it's really easy to come up with data and ask guiding questions to get through that, and figures and models. With non-STEM or social sciences, we have to think a little bit more about, okay, so what did that historian use to come up with this idea? And I've worked with social studies teachers that teach the Constitution. So our model is the Constitution. And we ask guided inquiry questions around different sections of the Constitution. Or geography, we use maps. So it works across disciplines. You just have to find the critical models that help the students learn. And one of our authors, Sue Guillot, in our non-STEM chapter in the book, she uses POGIL to teach French. And she actually uses different fonts to help the students know, okay, so this is directions, this is speaking French, this is where you should learn the concept of how to speak in French. So it works across disciplines. You just have to figure out what those critical models are. So it actually makes us as facilitators and activity writers become better experts at our own area, our own content area, because now we have to really think, how did we get to that concept? And how did the founding people that came up with these ideas, how did they get there? And how can I help my students draw those same conclusions? So finding those models, becoming a content expert yourself, is really how to be successful across disciplines.
Okay, next we have a question from Les. And this question is there a place for any type of direct instruction using the POGIL approach? For example, if part of the topic involves a procedure that is fairly well defined, do instructors demonstrate it and explain how to think about it as an expert does?
So I would say it depends on that one. I try to do, when I'm using POGIL, I try to do as little direct instruction as possible. However, when I'm teaching a lab, there are critical procedures in the lab that we have to follow to make sure we get accurate data. So there I might spend a little more time in direct instruction to help them develop the skills that they need to develop. But a lot of the folks that are using POGIL, for example, in mathematics, where we think there might be a series of steps that you go through to solve the problem, it still works to really guide the students through, and they learn that process better if they figure it out than if we walk them through it. That said, what I often do in a POGIL activity is every 3 to 4 questions, or every time the students develop a concept, I check in with them and make sure that we're all on the same page. And when I do that, it may be time for a little mini lecture to help clarify any misconceptions or help them make the next step in the process. So there is some time for direct instruction, but really, if it's important and I really want the students to learn it, I want them to figure it out for themselves. And that does take us to what I think is a heart of the question is, our role in the classroom really changes when we choose to use active learning, specifically POGIL. We really are not the sage on the stage. We're not the person in charge anymore. When you use POGIL, you're letting the students be in charge of the class because they're deciding what they're learning. They're deciding the pace, that type of thing. They're deciding what they're going to have trouble with. And so you have to be a little more open to giving students control in the classroom when you use active learning and when you use POGIL specifically. And it's really that philosophical change that I think a lot of instructors have trouble with when they're trying to decide, am I going to switch from being a lecturer to being more student or learner centered? Because you have to give up control, and that's the tough part of being a facilitator.
Okay, the questions keep streaming in, so let's keep going. From Dean, what is the preferred class size and instructor need? In team-based learning, we can do a very large class with 1 or 2 instructors. With POGIL, what's the preferred numbers and space?
So that's a good question, because a lot of people look at POGIL once they've experienced it and say, oh, I can't do this in a large classroom. There's a chapter in the book about using it in large classrooms, because we do have several instructors in the project that have are very active in the project, but also those that have come through the project that use it in large classrooms of 200 or more. And so obviously the space becomes a concern at that point, because it is hard to do active learning in groups in a lecture hall. We know that because it's hard to arrange the students, but it can be done. One thing that those who teach large groups have found is that having teaching assistants, and this could be, like at my institution, Susan Shadle uses POGIL in large chemistry courses, and her teaching assistants are undergraduates who took the course previously, and they're getting an internship credit to come help teach her course. Others use graduate teaching assistants, but having teaching assistants to help monitor neighborhoods in the classroom is useful. So that's part of it. The other thing is technology has made it a lot easier to teach in a large classroom, because that check-in that I mentioned earlier, that when students have a concept, now you can ask a clicker question and get responses from every team, as opposed to having to have a big group report out or just hit individual teams. So there's a lot of people out there that are using it in large classrooms to great success. However, on the other end, I have found that in my graduate classes, if I have too few where I can't have multiple teams, it's less effective because I can't get the teams to feed off each other. If it's just one group of students, it doesn't seem to work as well because they can get stuck and there's not another team to help them get past that.
Okay, that's super helpful, Shawn. Okay, we have another question here. One problem-based learning type method is to present a problem and then have students figure out what they need to know to solve the problem. The POGIL method seems to start with content and process first, before students feel a need to know, it seems. So are students motivated with POGIL without the context and the need to know?
So that's a part of a well-written activity that I did not mention, is the hook. So in all of my activities, I start with a little vignette that tries to get them interested in why is this important. And it could be from the popular press, from media, from a previous class, or I actually do a survey of in my class about what do they want to learn about the content that they do the first week. And I kind of pull from that to start building their interest. So the first page of all of my activities does that. It's got the hook to try and get them interested. And what I've also found is I do an intro activity, gets them started, and partway through they're starting to ask questions. Well, what happens if you do this? Hey, that's a great question. That'll be our next activity. And so it kind of builds that way. So, and some instructors do like a 5-minute mini lecture of, this is why this is important, let's figure it out. And that could be presenting something from the media, or this could be an opportunity for a cool demonstration at the front of the class. Why did this work? Why did this happen? That kind of thing. So yeah, setting the hook is important. And authors do it in different ways, facilitators do it in different ways.
Okay. Our next question is, how would active learning spaces contribute to the incorporation of something like POGIL?
Oh, so the new active learning spaces that we're getting at schools are just phenomenal. I think they're great. It makes POGIL so much easier. It makes the students more engaged because they can face each other, they can respond, they can move around. Oh, yeah, I walk into a classroom like that and I start drooling because it's going to work so well. And actually, I am known in my registrar's office for being kind of a thorn in their side, because I always fight for those active learning spaces as opposed to the lecture halls. And when I get a large class, we have issues because I can do it in a lecture hall and often do, but I want those active learning spaces because they are so conducive to students working together and facilitating you as a facilitator moving through the classroom.
Okay, now we're getting into the nitty-gritty with some of these questions. So
okay.
The next one comes from Alan. What does a POGIL activity look like in a non-STEM college course? For example, the number of questions, the time allowed, the presentation of group findings, etc. So really getting into kind of the logistics of what this might look like.
Yeah, so chapter 13 in the book has really good examples of what it looks like in a non-STEM course. And we've also included some examples on the Stylus publishing on the book webpage that you can look at what those examples are. As far as the model, so we have one example that in the book that is for information literacy, and it uses a letter. It's actually about Jackie Robinson, and it uses a letter that Jackie Robinson wrote. It uses some photographs of Jackie Robinson meeting various people, and it really, so that's the evidence. And then we're asking questions around that. How many questions? Really, you don't want the concept invention to take too long. So maybe up to 6 or so, and I don't want to be too prescriptive because it really depends on the complexity and where you're trying to get students. But you want to have 3 to 6 good exploration questions that kind of lead the students through your model. And then have them define what they just learned. And after they've defined it, then you say, by the way, what you just defined is, and you give them the term. And then some application. So how long should it take? Well, that really depends on your course and how much time you have the students. You really want to be able to complete an activity or a subpart of an activity in one sitting with the students. So in my class, we just finished an activity where part 1 takes a whole 50 minutes. And we're scrambling to get done in 50 minutes. But then parts 2, 3, and 4, we can get done in the next 50 minutes. So that it's chunked into littler steps, but that first step is just so big, it takes us the whole time to get through it. So chunking it into little steps is much better. That 50 minutes of working on that one part is tough, especially this early in the semester. But then chunking it and breaking it up. So you want to think about, it's just like with lecture. I mean, students start to check out after at most 7 to 10 minutes. So you want to be checking in with them about that frequently and having an activity that'll do that. Does that answer the question?
I think so. I think it
Okay.
got into the logistics. Alan, if you've got a follow-up there, let us know. We do have a second question from Alan, kind of following up on this a little bit. Do you grade each activity? And what does that grading look like? So getting into the assessment side of POGIL, can you address that a little bit?
That's a great question, and it's one that's frequently asked. I do not grade activities. I remember I'm teaching at the university level, and I tell my students that this is their study guide. It's their responsibility to make sure that when we check in for the critical questions, that they have the correct answer, they understand how they got there. So I do not grade them myself. Now, it is, especially at the secondary level or middle school level, it is fairly common for instructors to not necessarily grade them, but collect a representative sample to make sure everybody is staying engaged and keeping up. And actually, I hate to keep saying this, but we've answered this question in the book because it's common. One of the common things that middle school and high school teachers do is they say, I'm going to randomly collect one activity from each team. And that will be the grade for the whole team's participation grade that day. And so now the teams have to make sure that everybody's participating, keeping up, getting down the same answers. So the activities really are for the student. They're not really an assessment. Where the assessment comes in might be the application questions at the end. It might be, one of the things I do is we may have a quiz at the beginning of every class based on what we did the last class. It could be the tests that you give, but then also having the students reflect. I do a lot of journaling, what did you learn? How did you learn it? That kind of thing. I really try to push that metacognition with my students.
Okay, so we have a question kind of tied to part of your answer there, Shawn. Someone says, is POGIL primarily designed for college level students, or can it be utilized effectively in the K-12 setting as well?
Yeah, and actually, there's kind of a funny story. You get involved with POGIL and you get to know some of the people. And Rick Moog, who was part of the team that originally came up with POGIL, when he was first asked, he said, oh no, it's just for college. Well, Laura Trout, who was a high school chemistry teacher at the time, said, well, I'll show you. And she started using it in the high schools. And so we have examples of POGIL being used effectively middle school on up through high school. And we actually have some people that are using it. I think not my last one, but the authors coaching that we did 2 years ago, we had some early elementary people there working on activities. Now, that takes a lot more guiding because reading comprehension may be more of an issue. So no, the instructor or the facilitator has to be more involved in helping, asking the questions. But we have found so far that it seems with the right facilitation, the right questions, the right activity, it seems to work at just about any level and about any content area.
Okay. This is, we're getting close to the end here, folks. So this is my last call. If you've got questions for Shawn, go ahead and drop them into the Ask a Question box. A couple more things that folks have added in here. David says, I find POGIL really interesting. Could you just read the book to us? David, unfortunately, we don't have time for that today. However, you can click the Learn More button down at the bottom of the screen if you want to learn more about the book. But thank you. That's a good compliment for you, Shawn. And then we have someone else who said a really good intro to POGIL, which I didn't really understand. I do team-based learning and peer instruction and problem-based learning. POGIL might be a nice addition. This person is just pointing out a recent article from the physics teaching team at Harvard on measuring learning with active learning and how much students feel they learn in lecture versus active learning, for people who want to check that out.
Good article.
Yeah, that's a recent article that folks can take a look at. Okay, we have another question that's come in. How do learner characteristics interact with this teaching method? For example, low-high prior knowledge, low-high motivation, introverted, extroverted individuals, etc. Most research indicates that the efficacy of instructional methods interact with learner characteristics, and no one method works best for everyone. Are there certain learners that this method works best for and others maybe not so well?
So, and that's a great point, and that's something that Rick writes in his introductory chapter in the book, is that no matter what pedagogy we choose, we are going to advantage some students and disadvantage others. I think POGIL does a better job of giving an advantage to the majority of students. We actually have a team that's writing activities for a lower reading level for English language learners to help with that. But some of our middle school and high school teachers have indicated that using those roles really helps students who might be introverts or who might be on the autism spectrum, because it gives them directions as to what they are supposed to do on that day. And so it can really help those students. Also, it really pulls them together and puts them in a small group so they don't have to interact with the whole classroom. So the roles help with that, small groups help with that. But also part of that is designing your teams. So I do not let my students choose who they're going to work with. I establish the criteria that are important to me. For example, in my senior level course, it's students from all over our degree or our department with multiple degree emphasis areas. And so what I try to do is put different degree emphasis areas together. So I can have someone from athletic training working with someone from K-12 physical education, working with an exercise physiologist and a biomechanist. So they have a variety of exposure by a variety of backgrounds. I get them working together based on what I think are the principal criteria. And then I get them working together long enough that I can see, okay, this student might be more of an introvert. They might do better in a different team. And I can rearrange the teams to get a better mix of student personalities and capabilities if I need to. And putting the highs and the lows, or the mediums and the low achieving students together, seems useful. That said, I will tell you that your high achieving students, they've learned to use the system very well. They probably are going to be your most resistant learners because you're changing the game, and they were successful in the old game and they have to figure out a new way to be successful. And so they tend to be the most resistant to trying this.
Okay, so we have another question about potential resistance, and we've got a couple questions left, Shawn, so we're going to try to get through these if we can in the last few minutes.
I'll try not to take so long.
No, you're doing great, but we're just running low on time. So Andrea asks, as a faculty developer, how can I get instructor buy-in for this approach?
Have them try it. Bring somebody to your institution to do a POGIL workshop, an introductory POGIL workshop, and have them experience it. I attended my first workshop and I was not going to do POGIL until I actually tried it, and I thought, oh, I have to do POGIL. So having them experience it as a learner, I think, is the best way to get faculty to buy in.
Okay, and we have a final kind of logistical question here from Alan. Do you keep the same group together all semester or break them up for each activity?
Okay. So in a traditional POGIL classroom, you want to change teams 2 or 3, maybe 4 times across a semester. You want to leave them together long enough that they can develop a functioning team, but there's also advantages to mixing them up and having them work with other students. So leave them together long enough so that they can become functioning. And then, like in my class, we have 3 basic units, and I mix it up after each unit. So they are in 3 teams across the semester.
Okay, excellent. So Shawn, you answered 20 questions from our audience over the course of this webinar. Thank you so much. And thank you to our audience for being such engaged participants with such amazing questions. This was so fun, Shawn. Really appreciate all of your expertise. And I want to encourage everyone here, if you want to check this out even further, having looked through this book and looking through just the table of contents, it is as Shawn describes. There's a lot of good details here about how to do this in a bunch of of different settings, a bunch of different disciplines if you're wanting a little more information. So you can always find more about this POGIL edited collection on the Stylus website by clicking that green button that's at the bottom of the screen to learn more about Shawn's book. Thank you, Shawn. This was so much fun. And thank you again to our audience. I will be sending out a replay video of today's session. So if you are registered, you will get a link to that. And you are welcome to share it with colleagues if this is something that you think would be of interest to someone in your field, discipline, or your institution. Or if you want to bring a POGIL workshop, you can absolutely share this and let people know a little bit more about what this is. So thanks, Shawn, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.